can hear me now. And as I just typed in there, it's quite a deal for me to be sitting here in Los Angeles. You can probably, by the way, tell from my accent that I'm originally Australian, but living in Los Angeles. But here I am sitting in Los Angeles presenting to people all over Europe. So that's it's quite an exciting change for me, and I'm happy to have the opportunity. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about creating a student-centered learning environment with iPads. So it's more than just about using iPads. It's about how to create a productive environment where students get more control and ownership over their learning. For those of you that want to contact me, you've got my contact information up there on screen. You've got my email address there, samglitzman@gmail.com. If you're not using Twitter, I highly recommend it. And you've got my Twitter address there. I do so much learning and professional development with people on Twitter. If you haven't seen the website ipadeducators.ning.com, that's a site that I manage. And we have people using iPads for education really from all over the world. And it's a great place to come and to discuss any questions you've got, any issues, to read articles that people have written. So it's a really nice community site. And lastly is educationalmosaic.com is my personal website if you're interested in dropping in there and taking a look. On the right, you'll see the book that I have out, iPad in Education for Dummies. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Dummies line of books, I actually had somebody in England send me an email very offended that I would write a book for teachers and call it for dummies. But that's a line of books that's very popular in the United States, and it's a great introduction to using iPads in education, and it shows you different ways that you can use it, and we'll touch on some of those today. So let's get into the presentation. If you're all from different countries, you all work in different environments and in different schools. I know most of the schools I go into, there's a very definite stereotype. If you ask students to describe the stereotypical day at school, what do they expect when they come to school on any particular day? You'll find pretty much the same answers across the board. They're used to getting lectures, having teachers talk at them. Inevitably, they find it boring. They find it's extremely old-fashioned. Most importantly, they find it out of touch and irrelevant to the lives that they lead outside of school. And the reasons are not as complex as you might think. If you look at the actual, in fact, you can go back probably about 100 years, over 100 years, to when the educational system was originally designed. It was designed for a very different society and a different culture. Originally, it was designed to provide access to information and access to experts. Those experts were teachers that were trained in very specific academic disciplines, math, science, English. They could come into the classroom, and then students could be brought from various areas into one location and given access to information that they otherwise would not have had. And the learning and the education was very much about ownership of information, accumulating important information that we deemed students needed to have in order for them to graduate and be productive citizens when they finished school. The system is very much designed as a top-down structure. We have administrators that determine curriculum, they determine timetables, they know and determine exactly what will be learned at any particular day and any particular time. And even though we know that with all the change going on outside school, that students learn very differently today than they used to. In fact, there's this whole area now of brain research where they can show that students exposed to 40 or 50 hours a week of technology have total different ways of accessing and processing information. Yet we bring them into school and we expect the students to adapt to the way that we've always taught and we've always learned, rather than us adapting to the new ways of learning that they're experiencing outside of school. So the model of 100 years ago pretty much still exists in most schools today. And it's about ownership of information. And just an interesting fact here, 100 years ago, In fact, a little over. In 1900, there's people that have measured the rate at which worldwide information, would double. And in the year 1900, it took around 100 years for the accumulated information worldwide to double. Skip to 1945, and you'll see that it's around about 30 years. Jump all the way to 2010, and now all the information in the world is doubling in around about 13 months. And a recent research study released by IBM, their prediction is that by the year 2025, the information in the world will be doubling every 12 hours. I mean, that's the rate at which technology is now pushing information forward. It's allowing everybody to contribute to worldwide pools of information. So the notion that we can take a sliver of that information and deliver it to students and expect that our job as educators has been completed really doesn't make sense anymore. It's really morphed from not necessarily what you know, but today the skills we want to inculcate in students is more about what can you do with what you know? What are the skills you have in order to do something with all the information out there? And in actual fact, if you go and search on Google, you think that you see all the information that's up there, just again to give you a sense of how much information is available through the web. Google's indexed less than 0.01% of all the data on the internet. That's how much information is out there. So the immediate solution for most schools have jumped at the ability to add technology in the United States. The immediate solution would seem to be, okay, just go out, buy technology, and we've solved our problem. We've modernized our educational system. But the fact is, the way we use technology, we tend to patch it onto the existing educational models that we've always had. So it's more about better instruction rather than totally changing our model of instruction. And that's really what's needed. Even now, with all the accent on blended learning and online learning, it's still very much content and curriculum centered. It's about better delivery systems for our curriculum. It's about formative assessment so that we can judge what students are learning and adjust our curriculum and our delivery methods so that they can learn it better. What I'd rather address today is using technology to totally change that educational model, make it much more student-centered, give the learner more ownership over their learning, and have it driven by the student's ability to use technology in innovative ways that were not previously available. That model, it exists everywhere. If you watch students once they leave school, you'll see it happening pretty much all over the world in most households. When students come and they use technology outside of school, it's very much student-centered. What I mean by that is the learning is driven by the student's interests and curiosity. They can find anything they want on the web, and they're able to learn at their pace, wherever they want, however they want. I'll give you the case of my son. He's 13, actually just turned 14, and he's really into science. He's not particularly motivated, interested in the way science is being taught at school, so he comes home at night, gets on the web, and he's teaching himself how to program. It's driven by his interest, and he's in control of what he learns and how he learns it. And it's no longer about access the way it was 100 years ago. You can access anything you want in a variety of ways now. So we have to change that model about delivering access. The teacher in the classroom is no longer the expert, no longer the sole expert. Teachers are everywhere and accessible everywhere, whether they be on social networking sites, professional groups on the web, through Twitter, students learning in other countries. Students are able to connect and learn with teachers all over the web. And they no longer passively absorb information the way they used to. They're now actively publishing. You'll find students publishing and creating important content everywhere and on all sorts of websites. And importantly, and it's one that we'll come back to and address a couple of different ways today, the way that they communicate has gone far beyond text. In fact, that's no longer text is no longer the sole method of communication. It may have been, if you look at education 20, 30 years ago even, not even that long ago, It's primarily driven by text communications. Today, all our communications are awash in media. It's video, it's audio, it's animation, it's images. Our communication systems are totally changed and modernized, and we have to introduce those in the educational system. So our challenge then is, how do we take our old model that's content-driven, and how do we try and mesh that with this student-centered learning environment? How do we create a system that gives students greater flexibility and greater freedom and control over their learning? And when we do use technology with that in mind, then we have a totally reconstructed and energized educational system. So I want to try and show you some of the projects I've worked on, and I work with a number of different schools, some of the projects that I've described in my book, and just give you some real concrete examples of student-centered learning with iPads. Let me start with one that's actually quite an old method of learning. It goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks, and that's discovery-based learning, learning by asking questions. Discovery-based learning is essentially ignited by student curiosity, students' ability to ask questions and to pursue their answers. It's very much experiential. It's driven by the ability to try out solutions to questions, to see what goes wrong, to learn from your experience, and to adjust your behavior accordingly. It recognizes one thing that we don't do much of in traditional education, and that's allowing students to fail. It's the essence of discovery-based learning. It's that you allow students to experiment, to fail, and to learn from their mistakes. And it embraces that failure as important to learning. Now, there was actually an interesting article just this week in the Los Angeles Times about a research group at UCLA. It's a large university here in Los Angeles. And they're building machines that can think for themselves, and they think they're actually getting pretty close to actually think for themselves. Now, traditionally, you would think, okay, if I'm going to build an intelligent machine, our educational system would say, cram it full of as much knowledge and information as you can. And that's not the approach they're taking. What they're saying is intelligence instead is the ability to adapt to surroundings, learn from mistakes, draw conclusions, and react without instructions. What they're describing there is precisely discovery-based learning. And it's a model that can be an extremely effective way of creating an environment where you can have very deep learning in the classroom. I'm going to jump over and give you one example. And I'm going to try a few videos here. Hopefully, if you've got a decent connection, you should be able to see them. So I'm going to jump over here and show you a video. This is from a teacher that I know and have worked with here in the United States. So she went into a class and they were learning about the planetary system. So she went and she asked them, what interests you about outer space? What do you want to learn about? It happened to be a time where there was a lot of publicity about the Mars rover, the vehicle that was sent up to Mars to collect rocks and to study the Mars landscape. And so what they decided to do is do a combination arts robotics project where they broke into groups. Some of them researched the Mars landscape and worked with an art teacher to create, out of various materials, to create a landscape that mimicked the Mars. Sorry, I think we're getting a bit of feedback there. Sorry, that mimicked the Mars landscape. Others of them used Lego robotics in order to build little vehicles, and then others that were programming those vehicles to complete missions. Take a look at the project, and then I'll have a little chat to you about how it progressed. This is from the early stages of the project.
your thing to us so like an maybe. Cool.
So you notice there that the process of learning was very much about trial and error. They actually created different sorts of missions. They had to pick up rocks and put them in places, and they worked together. And in those groups, they were able to program those missions, learn from their mistakes, and it ended up being a fantastic project. The kids were tremendously engaged in it throughout. Let me switch back to my screen share. And one of the greatest things about their project also is one of the beauties of using, actually I just noticed somebody mentioning Arduino. There's a huge movement right now in the United States in sort of extracurricular activities in what they call the maker movement, using Lego robotics, which you saw in that project there, and Arduinos and all different types of programmable objects as a way of learning science, math, all sorts of different disciplines. What I was going to mention here is also they use Skype, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, but he's a world-famous astrophysicist. And they were able to have a Skype session with him where he discussed the project that they were trying to accomplish. He told them about his work with Jet Propulsion Labs, and he actually had some input on the real Mars rover, and it was a tremendous way for them to learn. Moving on, one of the other ways that iPads are used extremely effectively in classrooms is to document education, to document learning. And I love this particular picture. It's if you went back 20, 25 years and looked at what it took to create documentary video, you'd be looking at thousands upon thousands of dollars of professional equipment. You'd need a professional with lots of man hours, and a lot of what used to be done then can now be accomplished with very inexpensive equipment and even with an iPad. And we'll look at a couple of examples from the classroom. One particular example that I really like, the iPad has, with its built-in camera, the ability to do all sorts of incredible things with video. And one of the most impressive is the ability to do what they call stop motion animation. Let me show you this particular project. Now, this was a science experiment where they put mung beans inside of a container and watching the container for 3 days with an app that they used, a time-lapse app. They managed to take a photo every 5 minutes. And they let it stand there for 3 days to document the process of what happens when you plant mung beans and you use a specific type of fertilizer in order to have them grow. Rather than read about it in a textbook or even run the experiment in your classroom and see it every hour or two or every couple of times a day, with the aid of an iPad and time-lapse photography, you can really bring that entire project to life. They actually get to live the experience of seeing how it grows. Very simple process. I've used it in a number of classes. We use an app called Animated, but there's quite a number of different time-lapse apps that you can get for the iPad to simulate similar sorts of experiences. Let me show you one other project. So this is a physics project, and again, using the iPad camera to document learning and to document what students understand. This particular physics teacher went into his class, and they were learning about something called relative motion. And he explained it to them, but rather than have them answer questions or write an essay, he said, you know what I want you to do? I want you to go out, take your iPad, show me how relative motion works. So he said, just go ahead and document it using video. Take a look at the video, and then we'll discuss the process he used for creating it. These are students that have created this video. So I thought that was a tremendous example there of how you can use an iPad and have students actually demonstrate their understanding. In that particular case, they took the video, they then captured frames out of the video, took it into an app. I think they used Notability, it was the name of the app, in order to then annotate and mark up the frames of the video, then reinsert them, and then demonstrate their understanding of relative motion. So having a tool like the iPad with the built-in camera and the apps enabled them to have a greater ability to demonstrate their understanding, and by doing that, create an environment where they can learn it far more deeply. By the way, I did notice a couple of people discussing the stop motion animation. One of the things you really want when you're doing any sort of animation, stop motion or otherwise, is you need to get an iPad stand that'll hold the iPad still. And you can use that then, put the iPad in front of whatever it is you want to take the video of, and it'll hold it still for 2 or 3 days while you take the actual stop motion animation. Okay, jumping forward. And a category of apps that have become extremely popular and are fantastic learning tools on the iPad are what we call screencasting apps. The one you see up on screen is an app called Explain Everything. I use it extensively with a number of the schools that I work with. And Explain Everything, if you've ever used one of those very expensive whiteboards, interactive whiteboards, smartboards or Promethean, then you understand the concept of a digital whiteboard. This is essentially very close to what you get with a Promethean or a smartboard, except it's a $3 app that a student can use on the iPad. Now, a lot of people use screencasting. A lot of teachers use screencasting for creating tutorials for students. And that's wonderful, and I don't, I don't think that's a bad use of it. But I think where you find the real power of screencasting is when you put it in the hands of students and enable them to use the tools to create and demonstrate their understanding of concepts. Here you have Explain Everything as the tool, and you can see that you've got pencils, you can insert images. The example you see up on screen is a student explaining their answer to a math problem. Now, normally you'll get the answer on a piece of paper, but you can't step into the student's head and see how they arrived at that answer. With a screencasting tool, you'll notice down the bottom here, the very middle there, you've got a record tool. It'll record all the interactions on screen as the student vocalizes their explanation of the math problem. So they then can create a video, and you can see over here that I can export that video to the camera roll. I can send it to the teacher via any sort of cloud storage, and share it that way, and the teacher can then see the understanding that the student is demonstrating. Now, you can use screencasting tools for a number of different applications. We use it for a whole bunch of different things. Here's an example of using a screencasting tool for a virtual field trip. So what we did here was they were taking a virtual field trip through the United States. They had to plan it out. They went to Google Maps. They planned their map out. They can do screen captures on the iPad, bring those images into Explain Everything. They then plan their stops along the way. even to the point, if you go to the next one, I think you'll see that this was a trip across the United States, and they were going to the White House from California. They can use Google Maps and take street views of places along the way that they would stop at, bring them in to explain everything, and then create a movie that's a virtual field trip between two locations. That's just one different way of using screencasting. We use it extensively for language learning. Students might get some vocabulary words, and then they can build a story with images and interactions. They can then record themselves using the language that they're learning and explain everything. Things like keeping a media journal. We use that in language class. They'll take an image with their iPad or any sort of device during the week, bring it in at the end of the week, put their image in and create a media journal entry where they'll then have to talk about what they did during the week using particular vocabulary, foreign language, whatever it might be. So it's just a very, very great multi-purpose method for creating any sort of media combination and recording it. Probably where the iPad has had its greatest impact is in the area of communication. With the built-in microphone and built-in camera, there's now a whole range of different ways that you can use communication within the classroom that previously were unavailable. A few that I'll demonstrate to you now are things that you couldn't even conceive of doing just as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. Starting from the very simplest thing, you can't have 30 or 40 kids talking at the same time in class. You can't have any way of hearing them talk. But with the microphone and the ability to capture audio, whether it be in the classroom, outside the classroom, or at home, you can now create and share audio for a whole range of different things. This is a tool called AudioBoo. It's actually a website on the internet, audioboo.fm. And you can very easily just press a button and record yourself, and then it automatically gets shared with everybody in the class. Here's an example. Hopefully you'll hear it. I'll turn my sound up a little bit. This is just a second grader reading a book, and the teacher is able to record him, have him record himself reading the book, and then keep a portfolio of his reading progress during the year.
Little red hen are deliciously funny Blackwater. Jonathan Allen. One spring day, little red hen decided to go good to make her own delicious bread. He felt.
So I love that recording. He's very animated. The ability to record audio allows them to practice different skills than they would normally be able to practice in class. Very important skills of being able to speak, to use inflection, to narrate. And so you can use a tool like AudioBoo for a range of different projects. I've used it for doing mock interviews, for creating historical scenarios, for reading projects, even for, we'll look on the next one, things where you can create stories and have the students narrate them. You can use a tool like VoiceThread. VoiceThread, if you haven't looked at it, is a wonderful tool that enables you to create and collaborate on media projects online. In this particular case, the teacher gave the students a photo, and they had to go ahead and use that image to write a story, but she wanted them to take it a step further. So she discussed with the students, what does it mean to tell a story and to actually verbally communicate that story to someone? When you're listening to somebody, what makes it compelling to listen to them? How do you speak effectively? And as a result, they went into VoiceThread, they narrated their stories, shared them with other people where they got feedback, and it's a wonderful tool for that sort of media communication. We looked at stop motion animation before, where you're actually recording and taking photos. One of the most effective tools that you can use with an iPad, and it sounds funny to say this, but animation is a great tool for everything from sciences to languages and really any academic discipline. I'm going to start off by just showing you one piece of animation, just to give you an idea of what kids are capable of doing. We totally underestimate their abilities. I'm going to show you one particular piece of animation, and then I'll tell you who created it and how. I think it's an amazingly impressive piece of work. That's actually created by 4 brothers between the ages of 12 and 18. And they've got a following on the web. They call themselves the Animation Chef. What's really interesting about their story is they became interested in animation because their history teacher told them that they could use any form of media for a project they were working on in order to demonstrate what it is they wanted to share with the class. So instead of taking a typical written project, they decided to do it with animation, and it just got them interested in animation. They now have like 10,000 followers on Twitter and a website, and it's incredibly impressive. That's a teacher that had tremendous foresight. That teacher could see the value of communication and that kids can communicate in very powerful and personalized ways, especially when you put technology in their hands. I'll show you some other examples of animation. And again, it's what I use extensively with kids in class and with various schools. What I really love about the process of animation is in creating it, you actually have to break down a process. You have to think about how to present something visually. You have to think about what objects are required. You have to really delve deeply into the process you're trying to demonstrate. I've had kids do things like the life cycle of salmon, various explorations, all using animation and using an iPad with the process, and it takes really, it's a $2 app or even a free app in some cases to do what they want to do. This is one from a 6th grade class that I'll show you, again, using animation. You know what, I'm going to skip this one because, oh, I know it got up here. Here it is. All right, so this is a 6th grade class. They wrote a story, and in order to develop their visual literacy, the teacher said, okay, what I want you to do is we're going to take the story you've written, I'm going to break you into groups, and I want you to create animations that tell that story without sound. Just tell it visually. Think about how you want to communicate what it is that you're saying, how you're going to communicate the emotion, the story. How can you deliver that message purely using visual communication methods? And here's the animation they created. Again, keep in mind, this is not professional. These are 6th graders. Notice the different techniques that they've used in order to animate their objects. They're working in groups. You can see that some of the puppets there are controlled with strings. So it's a wonderful little project, and again, just another example of what kids are capable of doing when you give them technology. More importantly, when you give them the freedom and the flexibility to use that technology in ways that previously were unavailable. I'm going to skip back to my presentation and show you another technique that we use extensively.
Sam, we couldn't hear you because your microphone was switched off. Can you repeat that? I switched it on.
Oh.
Yes. Okay.
You're okay now?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Great. So I'm still saying some people can't hear me. Irene, you'll let me know if it's not working. I'll continue on. With a green screen, you can see there it's simply a green cloth, and you can use anything. I've used green paper. We've had classrooms where we've actually painted a section of the wall green. You don't even have to go out and buy that equipment. But this equipment here, it looks very expensive. Actually, we purchased it on Amazon for about $100. And you can just unpack it and use it in any classroom. You need a green screen. You need something to hold your iPad still while you take your video. And it helps if you have an external microphone, although that's not absolutely necessary. So with those few tools and a little creativity, you can go ahead and start creating all sorts of impressive and creative little videos. And we've used these for a whole bunch of different projects, and I'll show you a couple. So this is a second grade weather project. So what we had them do is, instead of reading about the different elements of the weather, how does rain formed, what happens, what's the weather like in a particular area, we had them instead research the weather for a city in the United States. They would research the weather, and then we told them, you're going to be a weather reporter and you're going to be on location in that particular spot. So here you can see a girl that came dressed for the occasion. She's going to report the weather from somewhere that's very cold and wet. They come, you can see the green screen behind her. And let me now show you an example of how the green screen works. What it does is we use an app. You can use iMovie. We use an app called Green Screen. It's actually called Green Screen. It's very easy to use. It'll pull the green out, and you can put whatever you want back in behind them. So here's an example of what it looks like once it's put together. I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry, I've got a plane going in the background. Ben, we told them that when they were talking in front of the green screen, that they should always look up at the camera and smile. And Ben took us very seriously about the smiling part. He was great. But that's just one example of what you can do with a green screen. And you can just do amazing things. We've had kids go out recently to a mission, a church mission. They took photos at the mission. They came back. And when they came back, they had to stand in front of the green screen and then act as tour guides for the mission. And we replaced the green screen with the various photos they'd taken at the mission. Here's another quick example of a weather project and a poetry project we did using green screen. So in this particular case, we had them write a piece of poetry. They did this every year. They have their poetry project where they write some poetry. And what we said was, okay, when you write poetry, you're trying to create an image in the reader's mind, in the person that's hearing or reading your piece of poetry. So we had them actually draw something using crayons and watercolors. And actually, I should stop and stress there also that when you create, when you're doing a project with iPad, we tend to forget that you can still use traditional media. And here you'll see a great example where we've used just traditional paints and art and media, and then all you do is take a photo of it, and then you can integrate that media into a digital project. So take a look at how, when they're reciting their poetry, you'll see in behind them, you'll see the picture they've drawn, and they also put words from their poem on green paper, and you'll see it pop up in the process of the video. Go ahead and watch. Green screen was replaced by the art that the green screen was replaced by the art that they'd created, and the words that you saw popping up were simply words that they put on green paper. And again, we used an app called Green Screen. You can use iMovie. There's a variety of different ways that you can remove the green and replace it. And it turns their poetry into very much of a performance. It gives them the ability to recite their poetry, being able to share it with an audience, and also being able to stand up and actually recite it as opposed to just writing it is very important for a lot of people. A lot of kids in that class, the teacher told me that there's quite a few kids in that class that simply don't speak up. They're very shy, and this was a very difficult process for them. But it was a great learning experience for them. And when they created their poetry creations, they were so excited to share it, and it's something that obviously they get great benefit out of. I've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to quickly jump through a couple of other topics that I wanted to show you. Media traditionally, we've been exposed to a lot of media for the last 30 years, but we're used to watching it passively. We're used to just watching media and absorbing it. We're reaching a point now where technology is enabling us to create interactive media. And it's an area I think that will very much expand in the next few years. We're just at the very tip of that iceberg. A couple of technologies that are available on the iPad that students can take great advantage of. One is this new website service app. It does all of those. It's called ThingLink, and you can get to it at thinglink.com. You can sign up for an account, and there's an app that you can use on the iPad. What it does is it enables you to take any image and to put, you'll see these little circles here, they're little hotspots. And when you put your mouse over the image, those hotspots will pop up, and then when you touch the hotspot, it can play a video, it can play an audio, it can go to a website, it can display text, but it's interactive. It enables the user, the viewer, to touch things on the image and then to expand on it. Now, how would you use this? So many different ways. Great for foreign language, great for, in this case, this was a novel they read. They read a very famous novel. Very famous, and the name's just escaping me. It'll come back to me. Lord of the Flies. So they read Lord of the Flies, and what happens on Lord of the Flies is they're on an island. So we had them draw the island as a map and then create little hotspots that represent events around the island. And then you can touch those hotspots and it'll tell you what happened there. If you go back and remember the apps that we looked at earlier, one of them was screencasting. Remember we looked at the Explain Everything app? So we had them recreate some of the events that occurred in that app, in Explain Everything, create videos, and then embed those videos in the image here so it would play when you touch the particular spot on the island. Again, by the way, I want to stress the fact that you see here it's been created with traditional media. We take a photo and integrate it. You don't have to do everything on the iPad. Here's another nice example of using ThingLink. This is an old photo of scientists, and it's very simple. I just went in there and and added a little biography to each of the scientists in the image. I want to give you a very quick look at a particular technology that's becoming very popular now. It's called augmented reality. Now, you've probably all heard about virtual reality. Augmented reality is similar in the sense that you can see something through the camera of an iPad or an iPhone or any other device that has a camera, and you can add information to it. You can augment it with information. Now, hopefully, I'm just going to play this here off my laptop. Hopefully, you'll be able to see it. Watch what happens. This is a project that I did with a school where we created a virtual museum. We had the kids create artifacts. They researched different aspects of a culture, and we had them create artifacts and put them up on display so that when people walked around with an iPad, they could point at it, and then it would play a video they created that would give more information about the artifact. So hopefully you can see it. I'll play it now and take a look at what happens when you point the iPad at a particular object. You'll see there with augmented reality, it recognizes that object, and it then goes ahead and plays a video that explains the background of it. Now, the particular app we used was one called Aurasma, A-U-R-A-S-M-A, and you can use that to tremendous effect. I've had, as an example, with one class, I'll tell you about this Brazil project in a second, but with one class, we had them, when they read novels, take a photo of the front of the book. We put the photo up outside on the classroom wall, and they create a little book report using Explain Everything, where they'll tell about the characters, the plot, so that when somebody walking past can point their iPad at the image of the book, and they'll hear the child give their book report. This particular project here is called the Brazil project. I think I'm going to be running short on time to show you the video. I really wanted to show you the video of the project, but they researched aspects of life in Brazil. They created masks that represented what it was they were researching. In this case, these were the legends of Brazil. And then they went ahead and using Aurasma, we put the masks up around the room so that people could walk around the room and take and see the videos related to the masks. I'm going to try and show it to you quickly so that you get a taste for what it looks like. The students then hosted, they had a virtual museum set up in their classroom. They had guests come in and they would host them, give them the iPad, and you'll see what happens when they walk around the room. This shows you the process of how they created the masks and the entire project as well. Note, by the way, these are students taking these videos, so they're all doing the documentary videos themselves. Now you can see the masks in the classroom. So that was a terrifically exciting project. The kids got fantastic feedback on it. And again, I have a lot more that I could say, but we simply don't have enough time. But I want to stop there and again stress that it's another example of the type of work that kids can do when you empower them with technology to be creative, to research, and to express themselves with media. So that's what we mean when we say using technology to reform and to change the process of what happens in the classroom. Kids are tremendously talented and capable when you give them the freedom and the flexibility to use technology in that manner. So thanks for your time and attention. I'm going to open it up. I said there's been a terrific amount of questions flying around, and I'm happy to answer any of those now for you. Irene, I'll leave it for you to take over, and I'll take any questions if anybody has them.
Yeah, because there were quite a lot of thank you very much. I mean, what I was saying in the chat box is that I have already downloaded Orasma now in my iPad. I can tell you the truth. And there are some questions that there were before about the previous tool, which was the previous tool. Somebody asked about the name of another tool that you wrote before, and they asked if Orasma can be used in Android. I'm checking now. I think it can be used.
I believe it can, although I haven't used it on Android, so I can't say definitively. But if you go to their website, you'll find all the information you need there.
I'm sorry if you can see things in Google Play. So, I don't know. There were some more questions, and I'm just asking for the people that have these questions if we can tell them or write them in the chat box again, because I don't remember everything. Instead of looking. And Yoga says that he tried the Orasma, but he can't imagine what to do and he gave up.
Yeah, you do need to look at a little bit of a tutorial in order to use Orasma. It actually brings up an interesting point. Too often, and I don't mean this is a criticism at all, but very often we get stuck in the classroom using technology because we're so used to being the expert in the classroom that if we don't know exactly what to do with the technology, we don't want to use it in class. And I always encourage teachers to think more on the objectives, think of what you wanted the students to learn, let them use the technology. Don't worry if you can't use it. Trust me, they'll work it out.
And I saw that they're asking for your website again.
I'll post it up here.
And there is a question, how do you substitute green board with images?
The question was, how do you substitute green with images? You can use a number of different programs. The one I use, I'll put it up here. It's called Green Screen, and it's by a company called Zoo Inc. It's a $3 app. You don't need to have it on every iPad. You only need to edit the videos on a few iPads. You don't need to have it on every single student iPad. But you can also do it with iMovie, and there's other applications that enable you to do it. But this one in particular, Green Screen, is just very easy to use.
I don't know if there are some more questions. Thank you. I think that there are no more questions, Sam. It was really, really interesting. And I'm very happy that I have my iPad to use all these things. And so if people don't want to ask something else, I just want to thank you. It was really, really nice. And especially in Greece, I know that again now they're thinking of using mobile education at schools, and they are looking for projects and things that can be done to take ideas. So I don't know how this is going to work and if it's going to work, but it's really amazing and it's really exciting.
Well, I think it is tremendously exciting that a lot of schools and even countries are talking about it, using mobile devices in education. What scares me a little bit is the trend that I see that so many large districts and large areas are getting iPads and Androids. But, again, it's what I said at the beginning. If you use it as a way to just do better instruction, I think you're missing the point. If you instead allow the students more power and flexibility to use the technology to explore and create, then you've got a system that really is powerful. And I hope that that's what we start seeing to happen in more areas.
Yes, that's true. So thank you very, very much for all, this inspiring webinar.